Special edition of the fifth quarter show with me, Rick Zamperin, here on YouTube. Thanks for chiming in. Big announcement today from the Canadian Football League Players Association. It released its first ever CFLPA report card. Now, this really looked at so many different standards and conditions, if you will, across the league. Everything from football operations to equipment to nutrition, team travel, you name it, it runs the gamut. And here to explain how it all went down is the interim executive director of the CFLPA, Peter Dyakowski. Peter, hello, how are you?
Hello, Rick. I'm great, thanks.
So let's get to maybe the why before we get to the how. Why did the CFLPA go down this route with this report card concept?
Our mandate is to ensure good working conditions for our members. So we want their conditions to be safe and healthy and fair. And this report card tool, we saw the NFLPA do it the last couple of years now, and it works. We're celebrating success, shining a light on areas that need improvement. And the way we built it, it's designed for teams to be able to address any area where they could make it better. We want the CFL to be the best league that it can be. Primarily, our motivation is for the players, of course, but improving the conditions for the players is going to improve your output on the field. It's going to make the league a better product. It's going to make the league more successful.
So how was this done? We understand that this was incorporated anonymously throughout the league, where players were able to, offer their thoughts on all these different kind of categories. So how was this done?
Well, we had this idea kicking around for a while, and looking at it, where we were in developing it. We had talked to the NFLPA about it, even as long as a year ago. We were looking at potential ways to develop it over the summer. It was a conversation that we were having in September. Are we going to pull it off this year? And we decided, let's do it. Let's get this out there. There's a lot of work together. We're polling the whole membership. We had 495 responses. Before that, we had to build the actual evaluation tool. We had to build the questionnaire for the players and develop it and decide which areas that we're going to test. So it was a big process just to get ready, just to roll it out, and then also to ask the questions as we went. We're going to publish this. We're going to expect a lot of scrutiny on these results. How do we make something that's going to be able to stand up to that scrutiny that we're comfortable publishing?
As a former player, and we won't get into the, each grade for each team in each category, but it runs from, A- all the way down to an F in some cases when it comes to, certain categories and certain teams and how they did. As a former player, did you expect to see the grades that we did see in some of these categories?
There were a few surprises. Generally, most of the grades aligned with expectations based on what we've heard in terms of player feedback. Because remember, what we're evaluating here is the players' experiences. These are all of the members of each club who are contributing their opinions. So this is lived experience. The data that we collect, it's provided by our whole membership. So this is the real thing. This is, boots on the ground, what the players are perceiving and experiencing. And there's some interesting ones. We know that teams try generally to do things the right way. Every team wants to win. So when we ask about football ops, and it's curious that, some teams who had really good records weren't always the number one in that category, but every team wants to have an A+ there. Travel, every team wants to have an A+. Diet and nutrition, every team should want to have an A+. But obviously certain things that they're doing and they're trying aren't working, aren't being received or perceived as beneficial by the players themselves. And what's really interesting when you look at the outcomes, so there's a few teams that were strong in we kind of have an impression of the team culture. There's a few teams that were weak, and you see organizations that are in flux. They've had a lot of leadership transition, and there's some things that weren't surprising, unfortunately, in some of the poor grades. One of the ones that's very telling, and that tells you that this isn't just a fun exercise, this is real facts that affect the way the game is played. Look at training and medical staff. So if you look at that medical category, what's really interesting, the highest score on there under training and medical staff, Toronto. The next highest score, Winnipeg. And who did we watch in the Grey Cup? The two highest scoring teams in training and medical staff. There's real world implications for the working conditions that our members are experiencing. And I should say, again, some further kudos to Winnipeg. They've been well known to have the best, lowest number of man games lost per year on a relatively consistent basis. I'm not sure where they're at, where the final number is for this season, but I know they've been generally the best performing team in that measurable. And then we see it borne out here. I'm just down the street from Tim Hortons Field, and I'm still, in contact with some of the players at my old longtime team, not my last team, but my old longtime team. And I hear how good the catering setup is and how well the team looks after them in terms of nutrition. And you see that borne out. They had the highest score, I believe, in that category. And the teams that have reputations for good equipment managers, where we don't get a lot of negative feedback from guys about sourcing, gloves, cleats, helmet fitness, helmet choice, you see those ones scored well. So there were some surprises. We learned some new things, but we also saw in our results, they reflected some things that we were already aware of. And that was gratifying because we saw, okay, this thing is producing data that makes sense.
How big of a factor do you think this report is going to have on players talking with each other, or helping determine where they're going to land if they are, especially a free agent? Free agency opens in less than a couple of months. Is this going to be, you think, a big contributing factor in their decision-making process?
Hopefully it helps, and hopefully it spurs a lot of conversations. Now, free agency doesn't open until February, but free agency really is going on right now, and that players who are going to be hitting the free market, they're talking to their home club, and they're saying, what's the deal to stay here? And deals are being done. We're seeing all these contract extensions getting announced. Teams, some of them, not all of them, but some of them have a bit of cap space left to spend in December, and that's usually. So we want these players to be able to see this data. That was part of our motivation to release it in December and not wait till, say, January or February. Look at it. Is the grass actually greener on the other side? Hopefully, some players will look at it and say, hey, you know what? Maybe it is pretty good where I am. And that's going to be a good thing for the league if it helps teams retain their talent. We always talk about retention and roster continuity. Well, if you've got something that says, hey, you know what, as much as maybe I'd like to have more from my club, it's relatively speaking strong. It is the CFL. We don't have massive budgets. No one's running on $100 million a year operating budget. So when you're able to compare apples to apples, that's helpful there. We also want teams to invest in player experience and player comfort, in things that make their lives and their playing lives and their careers better and more successful and healthier and happier, to attract the best talent. Any team that can get an A+ in diet and nutrition, there's nothing stopping them. There's a lot of categories where there's nothing outside of an organization's control to get a B or an A in. And that's the beautiful thing about this. We made sure that the way we built it, A's are achievable within CFL budgets, and we're seeing we've got more A's than F's.
Yeah, absolutely. And to segue off that, have you heard from any teams whether it's coaches or upper levels of management, or even, team physicians or equipment managers, to say, hey, yeah, this is a great opportunity for us to improve?
We had a lot of interest prior to the launch. It's just 4 hours old now, so I haven't got that immediate feedback yet from people who are looking at their grades. And just, if anyone's listening, I didn't give you the grades. These are the scores from the players. That's the beautiful. We did very little filtering of the raw data. It's the scores, and we applied a curve methodology where it's not a true curve. If you look at the CFLPA grades, they've got 32 teams. They do a true curve, so they have an A to an F in every, except head coach. They don't go below a D there. That's very nice of them, but they go A to F in every category. True curve. What we did was we applied, we produced a curve, and then we averaged it with our raw score to produce a semi-curve, where we increased the distribution of scores, which made sense because based on the question construction, some of the raw score bands were relatively narrow between a really good performance and a really bad performance. And so applying this, you distributed them, you allow more easily differentiable grades, but there's still ability to get an A. You can still get an F, and hopefully we don't see any next year when we do it. But there's a way every team can go and get A's across the board without breaking the bank. And you see some of the teams that have what you'd call a good culture, that seem like they've had a lot of continuity, both in the front office and the coaching ranks and within their personnel, our membership. Those ones seem to grade higher in any particular category. And part of that may be perception as well. Happy players who are satisfied in more areas are probably going to be more forgiving of other areas.
I think one of the there's many interesting parts of this report, but I think one for me, because this was anonymous, but the last question, I guess, in the survey or the report was, hey, just give us your thoughts if you want to add some thoughts about what you think of organization 1 through 9 for each particular team and each particular player. And what you really got, I think, was a very humanizing aspect of this report, where we're actually hearing from players. We don't know who's saying what, but we're really getting their raw thoughts about the job that they have in the league that we all love.
We wanted to include those to provide some color to grades, which can be maybe dry and not very detailed. And in some cases, we selected a few comments. If we had many on the same subject, just a few on that particular subject. It was really interesting looking at that. I didn't know that Winnipeg's travel arrangements were so unsatisfactory. There's some pretty funny remarks about the plane. Yeah. There's a lot that we expected. We had a lot from Calgary about the field, and fortunately, that message, the player reps for Calgary, by the way, I got to say, our player reps across the board were fantastic. It takes a lot of work to get guys to sit down, to lock in and dedicate themselves to answering a survey of this length, requiring a lot of thought during the season. Our team reps, kind of like your shop stewards in other workplaces, did a really good job, our player reps, of making sure that we had great responses. A number of them organized post-practice meetings for completing the surveys. But in Calgary, our reps were really good advocates for their teammates for that surface, that McMahon Field surface, which I think is the same one that I played games on. So that tells you how old it is. We have a good field testing system. There's still improvements to be made, but we've been working with the league on field testing, and they've got a pretty thorough approach now for testing. And while it wasn't failing according to the current standards that are in place, it was definitely the worst scoring one on those tests of our game fields. Our players who had to practice on it as well as play really raised the alarm on it. We consider that a dangerous working condition. Calgary, there's a few stakeholders there involved with McMahon Stadium. I think they were probably hearing it not just from their CFL players. And fortunately, they decided, hey, we're going to do the right thing and put a new surface down, even though it's probably difficult to make an investment like that because they're always talking in Calgary about maybe a new stadium, and they had that idea for the one down on the other side of the river. I kind of like McMahon where it is. I like the setting. It's very pretty up there.
Yep.
But anyways, it's getting new turf for 2025, and we felt like, well, we have to make sure we reflect that the preponderance, almost all the comments from Calgary, touched on that surface. We've got to make sure we, say, hey, we have been informed by the ownership there that they're getting that new surface. Hamilton was interesting. Lots of positive comments from Hamilton, and lots of positive, aside from the airplane, some really positive comments in Winnipeg as well. No negative comments out of Ottawa, but also no positive ones. But, sometimes no news is good news. And Ottawa generally had a strong score for a team that didn't have a terrific record. And we thought that was interesting. Obviously, you'd expect Toronto and Winnipeg would both have generally strong scores, and they did. Saskatchewan had a strong score. I played my last year there. They've got a big budget, so I think they can I think they should have had probably a higher score in their nutrition category. They can afford it. But that's the interesting thing about this. We see this is the player experience. Obviously, in Edmonton, we have high hopes for the new ownership. Hopefully, we're really, really hoping they go through this with a fine-tooth comb and really, really take it in, digest it, and see what can we do here to improve. It's a great opportunity. BC, from the outside, I would say phenomenal ownership. When I look at the things that Amar Doman is doing with that club from a business perspective, I've been to 3 games this year at BC Place Stadium. It's the most games I've been to outside of Tim Hortons Field. I almost said Ivor Wynn. Mm-hmm. And they're doing great things with that club on the business side. I think they're trying to do good things on the player side, but obviously the player experience isn't quite there yet. And hopefully they look at it and take it the right way and make some of those investments that will be reflected. Now, the teams that don't have all-in-one facilities have a little bit of a tougher time, especially if they don't have new, Hamilton, all-in-one terrific facility. Yeah. I think it makes it a little easier. BC has a challenge with their practice facility. Calgary has aging McMahon. But we built it, or we didn't put a facility category in. We didn't want to set anyone up for a guaranteed F. This is the CFL, but we did look at what's the functionality and what's the expectations and what's the player experience that those aspects relate to. You can address those even if you don't have a beautiful brand new Tim Hortons Field.
Absolutely. I think one of the more interesting things as we go on in this process in the years to come is, how does this inaugural report compare to the one a year from now? What improvements are we going to see, and what are teams doing to make their players healthier, more comfortable, happier with their team flights, or whatever the case is? That's really going to be really, really interesting. Some parting thoughts on this whole process and what you hope might be better or change for next year.
Well, we're going to be careful any changes that we make in the survey so that you still are able to look between years and compare apples to apples. We were very fortunate to have the participation of Dr. Desmond McEwen out of the University of British Columbia for that statistical analysis and the work on processing the results and being able to translate that into letter grades. That's something that, when you look at the finished result, it looks very simple. But when you have a 58-question survey that includes multiple choice, various numbers of options, rating questions, scale of 1 to 100 questions, all different manners, to take all of that and turn it into a very objective singular data point in a letter grade, and make sure that we're following the same rules through all of our questions and categories, so that we're not playing with things to try to make something fit, and being very hands off. That was a very tricky part of the work. But now we have this template, and we're going to be able to apply it going forward. So we may tweak, we may look at some of the categories, we may add some questions, but we're going to make sure that the grades do translate. And then that way you're going to be able to say, we're not going to fall back a grade here. We're strong. We want to get a little bit better, but we want to get a lot better here. And there's going to be, I think, for some teams, some big time wake up calls, and also some very easy fixes, important fixes, things that are going to make a big difference to the day-to-day lives of the players, but things that within an organization you can accomplish. So we're excited that this is going to improve the player experience. It's going to improve the on-field product. It's going to make the league a better place and help us attract top football talent from around the world, and especially steal away some more stars from our southern neighbors.
Yeah, when I first heard about this report card several weeks ago, I was excited to see not only the results, but the impact that it's going to have on the game going forward. And I'm really intrigued to see what teams and how players kind of respond to this. Peter, thanks for your time. Amazing job. Looking forward to what the PA has in store next year as well.
Thank you very much, Rick.
That is Peter Dyakowski. He is former Tiger Cat, former Saskatchewan Rough Rider, former Argonaut, at least for a few hours. He might not admit that. Apologies for the audio portion. We're seeing having some Wi-Fi issues, but I just want to go through the report card, at least in Hamilton's case. Just kind of reflect on the grades that the Tiger Cats received. And their worst grade was a C+, which, hey, we all got report cards. C+ for me would have been okay in certain categories. In their category was an interesting one, football operations. And the football operations category is basically, players being asked about their relationships with their head coach, other coaches on the staff, the video staff, their team activity scheduling, and how the team adheres to CBA provisions when it comes to practicing in pads, practice times. So that was a C+. That was the worst grade that the Tiger Cats got, which is pretty good. And by the way, Hamilton and Saskatchewan in the aggregate grade were the two highest among all 9 CFL teams. They graded out as I think it was a B overall. Hamilton got a B in management and administration, a B in training and medical staff, an A in equipment, the highest in that category of all 9 CFL teams, a B- when it comes to family treatment. So how wives and children and partners of players are treated not only on game day, but throughout the year, throughout the season. A B for the Tiger Cats when it comes to nutrition and diet. B+ for team travel. So I guess the Ticats have a much better plane than the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who they graded theirs as a C+, which by the way was not the lowest. Team travel, the lowest grade went to Edmonton with a D-. And the Ticats also got a B- when it comes to training camp. And it's more than just how training camp is administered, but the living quarters, the food, all that kind of stuff that revolves around training camp. So really interesting analysis. You can check it out online, CFLPA.com. It's splashed right there at the top, the report cards. You can analyze all the different grades for the teams. I will say this, just before I let you go, there was only 2 Fs in the entire report card, and they were both given to the Edmonton Elks. Certainly a team in transition. They have new ownership now, and hopefully that will, cure some of the things that has ailed them when it comes to nutrition and diet. Was F number 1, and F number 2 was training camp. And hopefully, overall, this report card hopefully will spur teams to do better in some of these categories. It's not going to be like a light switch and will be improved overnight, but the process, and this process has been ongoing, obviously, for decades. But I think what the PA is doing is saying, hey, we're monitoring this now. We're getting important feedback from the players, so let's make these positive changes going forward. Big thanks again to Peter Dyakowski, the interim executive director of the CFLPA, for joining us on the show. Hey, the next edition of Fifth Quarter Show Legends is going to drop on Thursday. Seasons just dropped earlier today. Give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you next time on the Fifth Quarter Show here on YouTube. Oski wee wee.